Hello and welcome to today's webinar, FlashStack, Unmatched Simplicity, Speed, and Flexibility for Your Data Center. This webinar is brought to you in partnership with Pure Storage and Cisco Systems. Thank you to Pure and Cisco for supporting today's event, and thank you to our audience for joining us on this special webinar. We've got a great event lined up for you today. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator on this webinar. Before we get started, just a few things that you should know about the event. First off, we want this to be educational. We want you to get all your questions answered, so we encourage you to use the questions box. It's right there to the left of the slides window. If you click the word that says questions, I'll highlight it for you now so that you can see where to ask your questions. We'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of today's event, so get your questions in early. We also have experts from Pure Storage standing by to answer all your questions about FlashStack, how it works, and how it can help you. So don't hold back when it comes to questions. Of course, we appreciate all the welcome messages and comments. Keep those coming as well. But we also want your toughest IT challenges, and we are here to help you solve them. I also want to call your attention to the Handouts tab. There is a link there to Pure Storage. And finally, at the end of today's webinar, some of you may have heard that we are announcing the winner of an Amazon $300 gift card. That only happens on the live event. If you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found in the Handouts tab. And without further delay, I'm excited to introduce today's expert presenters. They are Mr. Andrew Miller, Principal Systems Engineer at Pure Storage, and Mr. Scott Sullivan, Engineering Leader for the U.S. Commercial Data Center team at Cisco. Andrew and Scott, it's great to have you on. We're first going to hand it over to Andrew. Andrew, take it away.
Thanks, David. Really appreciate the kind words. It's been awesome over the years as our paths have crossed multiple times and seeing how Actual Tech Media continues to grow. I just love seeing it, especially as we've collaborated in between different roles over the years too. Today, though, I'm really excited to be joined by Scott Sullivan. As you can see on the screen, we are here to talk about FlashStack and to talk about, like it says, unmatched simplicity, speed, and flexibility. Each one of those words is there for a specific reason. Hopefully by the end, you'll feel like you've got some proof points behind each one of those. In case we haven't met or run across each other, my name is Andrew Miller. I'm a Principal SE with Pure Storage. I think most importantly for the conversation today, actually started on the customer side, from kind of admin to engineer to architect, and actually in data center roles and playing with virtualization and storage and networking, etc. But FlashStack is a collaboration, and that's why I'm really happy to be joined by Scott Sullivan. Scott, do you mind briefly introducing yourself?
Yeah, you bet, Andrew. I'm happy to be here. Scott Sullivan. I lead the engineering. I'm the engineering leader for U.S. Commercial Data Center. It's our segment we call U.S. Commercial for the U.S. So, Andrew, happy to be here and enjoy our partnership.
Awesome. So we will be kind of tag teaming as we go along the way here. And as was promised, you might have seen, we're not actually going to start with what FlashStack is. We're even going to start with a little bit of whiteboarding. You know, we'll send up a prayer to the demo gods here, the whiteboarding gods. This works out. But we're going to start with actually a little bit of why we think FlashStack makes sense. But from your standpoint, we're going to go deeper into days 0, 1, and 2, because that's more of a customer-centric way than a vendor-centric way. And then finally ending up with use cases. Now, you may notice there's a new banner. And so some of what we're going to cover today, if you're familiar with Cisco and Pure, are items that have been around for a while. At the same time, there's a good bit of new stuff throughout here. Either it may be new products and technologies and capabilities. It may be new things even from kind of maybe a messaging or how we're framing it standpoint, so it's hopefully more relevant to you. So what we wanted to start with is actually not start with talking about what FlashStack is, but more starting with the why. So indulge me for a minute here, and we're just going to jump right over to a little bit of a whiteboard. And I think if I could just get a confirmation, Scott, that you're seeing it here on the screen, and hopefully it looks good. If I'm able to see the whiteboard.
We can see it.
Awesome, thank you. So when I've started talking about this, I've been kind of wandering around this space for a while. And the goal was when we talk about things, and truly, it shouldn't be what we have and what our products are, although that's actually really fun and it's fun to geek out about this stuff sometimes. But thinking about what matters to you. And there's two main pieces here. The first is, kind of a day in the life, if you will. So over the years, I think a lot of us have kind of lived, in a construct of, thinking about things from a day 0 and day 1 and 2 perspective. Okay, so breaking that down a little bit, day 0 is around architecture, right? I'm looking at products, I'm evaluating, I'm thinking about maximums and minimums and flexibility. I have various friends that are consultants in various ways, and they're thinking about design constraints and kind of mapping out architecture, if you will. There's a lot, and often this is before the purchase, but not always. Sometimes you get given a bucket of stuff, and you got to figure out how to navigate that from an architectural standpoint. What's interesting is that sometimes day 0, of course, can bleed into day 1, and day 1 classically is implementation. So we'll abbreviate it there. And so even sometimes during day 0, you can get a feel for what day 1 is going to be like by asking for a proof of concept or a demo, kind of thing. You got to start to get a sense for that day 1 during day 0 and how simple something is. Because, of course, in day 1, we're in this setup process, implementing it, getting it up and going kind of thing. There's also the interesting thing of day 1 that sometimes we kind of mask the complexity in day 1 with professional services, right? I didn't mention this earlier, but I was on the partner side for 8 years, customer for 7 years, partner for 8 years, where we did a lot of these kinds of implementations, or sometimes as a customer, I do it myself. But it's not just day 1. It's actually also like day 180, day 365. Anytime you have to majorly expand or re-architect a system, you're kind of back in day 1 mode, right? So, of course, last but not least is day 2. And I got to get that neat enough here. So day 2, for me, I think about this as operate and optimize, or maybe this is business as usual, keeping the lights on, keeping things running. Classically, as you go up the org chart in an organization, the CIO, maybe the board, they don't care about day 2, or they would prefer not to. They would like to pay people, like I used to be as a junior admin and otherwise, to care about day 2, unless they care about day 2, 1, when there's so much time spent keeping the lights on, either the amount of budget that goes toward it or the amount of project time, that there's no time for new projects and new initiatives that can help drive the business forward. Or, of course, if things go offline, if SAP or Oracle or even just Exchange, right, if that goes offline, people notice. So let's apply this kind of concept into a little bit of data center history and kind of data center infrastructure stacks, if you will. This is where I started out, was frankly in the kind of in the early 2000s, right? And it was in the time when, there was storage. We were starting to get into storage, plus compute, plus virtualization. And if I hope for most of us, the virtualization was a huge driver here. A lot of us built our careers around VMware and the impact that's had. And if you don't still feel a little bit of amazement about storage, vMotion, and even just vMotion and what it can do, moving workloads around, that's a pretty amazing kind of thing. This was so successful, almost maybe a victim of its own success, that we started to move into a world of, what we'd call reference architectures. And this is where, and just let's give credit where it's due. This in some ways was launched and driven by NetApp and Cisco, but it expanded as an industry thing beyond that. So this is where you start to take some of the flexibility. You trade some of that off. You have long design docs or guides that are hopefully making that day 0 and day 1 a lot easier and faster. You're not having to figure everything out as much kind of thing. There was then yet another wave, and this one I had a little bit of a front row seat on due to being on the VCE Partner Technical Council for a couple years. So again, giving credit where it's due. Let's just be real. So converged infrastructure, companies like VCE, Oracle's played in here with Exadata. Again, I'm not not having competitive conversations. It's just a history of where things went. And as we did this, we started to give up more and more flexibility because we were seeking simplicity and stability. Right? These were as an industry, we continue to seek simplicity from a deployment and maintenance standpoint. And this is where we got into things like, an LCS, that's a logical configuration survey. You plan everything out ahead of time, so when something shows up on the floor, you can implement it right away. Or you even have things like, an RCM, a release compatibility matrix, which also goes toward the idea of, what are all the code versions, and do I need to upgrade them together, and will they work together or not? That kind of thing. All good goals, and all coming out of some of the requirements and drivers in the marketplace. Now, the last wave here would be HCI. And what's interesting here is this is where the hyperscalers start to kind of come and stomp around in our data centers a little bit, right? Before, up to this point, it's been all the same kind of enterprise components of various types. But from a hyperscaler standpoint, this is where we start to hear about Cassandra and other things. This is a tight coupling, of storage and compute and virtualization. This gives us the benefits of linear scaling, right? That's kind of the design center. You add compute, you get storage, and vice versa. Now, that's not that you can't have flexibility around that in some ways, but the design center is around linear scaling. What I find fascinating there is that one of the gentlemen that I worked with in a previous life actually for a while worked at Google on what was called the Colossus file system. That was the second generation file system after GFS and then Colossus. And so we've even seen some of the hyperscalers move, they pioneered some of the kind of the HCI type approaches and even the technologies. And they've even gone in some cases toward, some cases still doing HCI, some cases doing, disaggregated, racks of compute, racks of storage, fully automated, et cetera, kind of thing. Now the key here is that there's one theme across, which I've kind of hinted at but haven't called out. From a customer and an industry standpoint, we're always pursuing simplicity, right? I mean, that is what we need and what we want. And even more importantly, what the business is asking us for is, simplicity for applications. Now, there's one other point I'd like to make here before we kind of wrap this up, or this section, is that even I like to read a lot, and sometimes it's even like alternate history type stuff. That can be fun reading. So what if you go back 10 years ago, and someone had come in and taken one of the highest complexity items in this whole kind of historic history, which frankly often has been storage, and had dramatically simplified that 10 years ago? What would the landscape have looked like, right? It might have looked very different and would have, I honestly think, dramatically impacted some of the waves around HCI and CI and how some of those have played out, right? That obviously kind of leads us back into FlashStack, because we are going to talk about FlashStack. This is where we kind of jump back over to the slides. If you're interested in this approach, by the way, this is actually fully available on YouTube. If you haven't heard enough of me, or you actually want to see what I look like, such as I am, kind of thing, you can see it. But as we move this into FlashStack, we talked about, there were trade-offs. We keep making trade-offs around simplicity and rigidity and scalability. So how do you find all the different characteristics of the different architecture options, simplicity and cost, performance and resilience, flexibility and scalability, that each of these options has had different trade-offs around over the years, right? In a perfect world, we'd like all of those. We want to have our cake and eat it too. From an application-centric standpoint, it shouldn't just be starting with infrastructure options, although sometimes that's where we start from an evaluation standpoint. It should be about looking at it from an application-centric perspective, about meeting SLAs and performance. And if the business asks me to do something, can I respond potentially within hours or days? And do I have to spend a lot of my day two time on forklift upgrades that don't inherently have value to the business, but are the cost of doing business? Those design principles and that thinking is what has led us into FlashStack. There's kind of three key points here around building what we're calling, as you can kind of see there, a reference architecture plus. It's about taking the servers, and we'll hit on this more later, but reimagining and simplifying servers. Cisco led the market here with UCS, right? Making the servers stateless and flexible with a lot of market validation there. Reflecting a similar approach from a storage standpoint, this core alignment of simplification and statelessness is, from a pure standpoint, we'll go deeper. I think Cisco has a few networking products and might even be the leader in that space, right? So that's a pretty obvious one. It fits really well. There's so many advanced capabilities. When you put all these together into a very flexible, we're almost kind of calling a reference architecture plus, with the goal being that we look at what people have been hoping for out of CI and HCI and embracing that and trying as much as we can, almost let you have your cake and eat it too. And for the rest of this presentation, actually what we're going to do is we're going to dive into a lot of this. We started with day 0, day 1, day 2. That wasn't just meant for the whiteboard section. We're actually going to dive into FlashStack from a day 0 perspective, day 1, and day 2 perspective. And you're like, that slide's a lot of stuff, and I can't read it all. Don't worry. We're going to go into each one of them. Now, I want to jump over to kind of pull Scott in here in just a minute. But before I do that, if you're thinking like, okay, that sounds kind of interesting, and maybe that's some neat architectural background, et cetera, but should I actually care? Are there actually any proven results like it says on the slide? FlashStack is a partnership between Pure and Cisco. Has actually been around since 2015. But customers saw the alignment from a product and capability and a core architectural principle standpoint going all the way back, even since really the initial release of Pure, and of course UCS predating that somewhat. We've got some great kind of business-centric data points, whether that is from, this is a Gartner survey about how FlashStack can address and reduce the major cost drivers in the data center, whether it's people, us, and servers and facility costs and software. This is now looking at an IDC study about increased admin efficiency, a customer quote around that as well, actually, about saving dramatic amounts of time. And in their case, they were able to reinvest into improving security posture. I mean, we've got ransomware and lots of other crazy security stuff going on right now there. And last but not least here, this is now actually another IDC survey as we're in the land of ROI and TCO and thinking about these. Even if you may look at these and be like, oh, I don't know if these numbers are right. They're dramatic enough that usually when I talk with folks, it's like, even if this isn't exactly your organization, there's some pretty dramatic differences when we explore this out from as validated by IDC, that it's worth looking at, even if strictly just starting from a business perspective, if that's your role. However, I want to pause here though, and I meant what I said about really enjoying appreciating Scott joining me today, because we've been working together over the last couple of months, both on some of the kind of the content development, actually a little bit of what you've seen there, as well as doing some joint Pure and Cisco training. And with that, I know, Scott, there's been even kind of a personal time investment for you here beyond just the Cisco and Pure partnership. So I'd love to get your thoughts on just kind of the overall, your perspective on the Cisco and Pure partnership overall.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And as you know, we've built a lot of success together, and it's been great. I mean, we have 6 years of partnership, which is truly what I believe is built on trust. But it really doesn't matter what Cisco and Pure think. It's what do our customers think? How do they perceive our relationship? And that success can be demonstrated by the thousands of joint customers we have, growth off the charts. And why is that? It comes down to the simplicity of our, seamless relationship we have from a support standpoint. It's based on the simplicity, the reliability, and performance, some of the things that you've touched on already. One of the best things that you can get from a compliment is from your customers, right? And they feel that when they're working with Pure and Cisco, they feel like they're working with one company, and that the FlashStack is seamless. It's not Pure and Cisco, but Pure and Cisco together as one company. So we definitely have a tight relationship, and as that can be seen and demonstrated by what our customers say about our solutions that we have together.
A little bit of maybe 1 + 1 = 3. I'm going to embrace the cliche. If anyone out there is playing, if anyone out there is playing Buzzword Bingo, you can fill in some of your spots here, because hey, that's what we do when we're sitting at home these days, right? If we get a little more specific, we're going to dive into a lot of the specifics. But when you think about Cisco and Pure working together, are there any kind of specific items that come to mind for you?
Yeah, it is. When I think about us working together, it is, if you take a look at, you mentioned a few of them already, the validated designs, the number of validated designs that we have are important, right? Our customers look, again, for a turnkey solution. They don't want something that's disjointed, and they don't want something that's disjointed from a support standpoint, a day two operations. And you get that. You get that through the CVDs that we've jointly developed. You get that through the partnership that we have from a supportability of our FlashStack system together. And also, if you look at when we go to market, there's things, and we're going to talk about this further when we get into the presentation, but some of our key orchestration management products that Cisco has, the first vendor that we've looked to integrate those into has been Pure. So it just shows the tight relationship that we have with Pure, between Pure and Cisco.
I love it. I feel like you're foreshadowing where we're going to go. So if any of those items, someone's like, well, Intersight, CVDs, I want to hear more, that's where we're going. So I think with that, I will keep moving, and I'll hand the virtual talking stick back to you periodically as we go along the way. And thank you, Scott. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, sounds good, Andrew.
So let's dive into, like we promised, kind of day 0, day 1, day 2. So we've got a bunch of stuff here. We're going to focus first on this kind of day 0 column here. It's about statelessness, innovation without re-architecture. I'm not going to read this actually, because that's what we've got here to go deeper. So day 0. We're in architecture mindset here. Now let's be upfront. Sometimes things in day 0 and day 1 can kind of blend together. Things play back and forth. But where I like to start here is actually really where the partnership started. It was before FlashStack was even created. It was customers looking at Cisco and really UCS and saying, This is innovative from the standpoint of making a server stateless. That's the core technical principle. We do that via the service profiles that abstract the identity of the server. That's stored in the Fabric interconnects. There's some really great engineering work done around the virtual interface cards and protocol virtualization too, wrapping all that in. So, the server being stateless actually plays out in some very dramatic ways. I mean, there's been some pretty immense market share gains from Cisco, and no one might have expected that, 10 years ago or so. It's always fun to go back and look at previous predictions, right, kind of thing. However, you look at it from a pure standpoint, similar design architectural principle played out differently from a storage standpoint. Okay, that when you look at controllers in a pure array, you can change controllers in family and between families without taking downtime. Or if you have crazy, that's talking about flash array. If you have high throughput needs, high performance block and high performance object and file needs, that's represented in FlashBlade. There's even some really core hard engineering here around what we've done with not buying SSDs and addressing the NAND directly. Even the NVRAM modules, this is a fun story. If you've ever gone through like a power down procedure, the power down procedure for pure arrays is literally yank the power, because we actually architected that we don't want to have a special procedure for something like that, because when you lose power, it may not be at a predicted time, right, kind of thing. So that's actually literally the shutdown procedure. You may want to shut your host down first, but there's a lot of hard engineering here work, but all of it focused around this core principle of statelessness and leading into simplicity. Now, of course, the network is stateless. The network had better be stateless. That's a definition of what a network is. But as a reference architecture plus, what I like to highlight here is not only is there a phenomenal portfolio and capabilities, from a Nexus and MDS standpoint, and actually as a side note there, Pure is the first organization to be adding the capability to resell MDS. That may seem like a minor item in a way, but I want to say it's the first in 10 years or so. It's a reflection of Pure's storage growth. We're the only storage company growing double digits right now. Everyone's single digits or negative. But even you think about something like ACI, this is a huge strategic focus for Cisco. And actually saying, if you say FlashStack, well, we can reference in, and there's CVDs that pull designs that actually pull in ACI, because we're not going back to a little bit of the kind of the CI and HCI conversation a little bit. We're not having to artificially limit some of the capabilities because we've simplified so dramatically the underlying components at a compute and storage level. That leads to what I love to think about is the idea of innovation without having to re-architect. And there are actually customers who have been along this journey with Cisco and Pure via FlashStack of, starting out here and not having to rip and replace for almost a decade. If we round it up a little bit, kind of thing. There's continuing advancements from a Cisco and UCS standpoint, of course, on a network standpoint. There's continuing advancements from a Pure standpoint about features and capabilities and speeds and density of flash storage, right, kind of thing. So this is where we start to say, hey, this is a platform that can get better over time without ripping and replacing. Now, you may be thinking about, well, okay, so what about some of the new trends that are coming out today? Well, one of those, of course, one of the banner ones there would be NVMe. We're going to dig deeper into CVDs. Mainly, this is meant to illustrate about NVMe. Cisco and Pure are at the forefront here. I'm not going to pretend NVMe adoption, end-to-end NVMe, is actually very high right now, but it is where the industry is going. I think we all know that. And actually, the first end-to-end Cisco validated design for NVMe is actually with Pure, and it's focused around Oracle, like it says there. It has some neat impact there about driving lower CPU utilization, which can actually map into licensing costs. That becomes a very interesting conversation, not just at a technical level. But even though this is very real, you can find this document online. It isn't just cool from a technical standpoint. We mentioned licensing. It also has real impact from an application perspective, right? So this is where it's fun. I haven't entirely lost my technical soul over the years, kind of thing. It's fun to geek out and think about technology and how this stuff goes together. It's even better when it has direct business impact and relevance. So whether we think about Oracle, SAP, Epic, these are the applications that run the business. Then we start to see dramatic increase in bandwidth, reductions in latency, an increase in IOPS. This translates into real business value. The last section, part in kind of day zero, is then thinking about, if we're talking about a platform and the pace of innovation, one of the key things here is having an API-driven architecture and being very open that way. Cisco led there with Cisco UCS, Pure as well. And the pace, the number of integrations, and the pace of continuing integration. So you see here, there's obviously a bunch of Cisco items listed here. UCS Director, DCNM, Intersite, UCS Manager, et cetera. We're gonna go back and forth as we wander around these. But there's also a lot that are part of the larger ecosystem. And when I look at this, the API being a first-class citizen to the GUI is not just a cool thing at potentially maybe enterprise scale or where you want to automate lots of things. It's also a key requirement if you're going to invest in a platform where you're wondering what's the pace of innovation going to be like, and what's the integration timelines going to be like for all the products that we don't even know about, that are being incubated somewhere, who knows where, and we know there's stuff we're going to want to integrate in the future. If you have a API-driven architecture, the API is a first-class citizen, there will always be a faster pace of integration into the larger ecosystems. And you can find a lot more there on Cisco DevNet as well as Pure Code. These are sites set up to focus on that. Next, day one. So this is about implementation, etc. I appreciate Scott mentioning CVDs. I think he queued me up a little bit there, and we've done it before. So these are what we call Cisco validated designs. And I like to dial in a little bit here because sometimes over the years, it's easy to get a little bit cynical. It's like, oh, it's a paper that just has a bunch of parts and pieces. It's kind of a glorified bill of materials. This is what I call solution engineering. This is hard work. Even like there's times where on a periodic basis, the number of flash arrays on the Pure side that are dedicated to this, there's justification, like how many flash arrays are going into like physical labs where all this testing is done. So the way I like to break that down a little bit is, let's just take one of these, the Citrix Zen Desktop one, for instance. A little bit hard to see here, but this is for 5,000 virtual desktops, okay? So this is actually a couple hundred pages. You're like, ooh, that sounds scary. You said simple. That doesn't sound simple. Well, bear with me. So there's a short section on setting up Pure. There's a short section on UCS, somewhat longer section on Zen Desktop. Of course, there's network components there. And then it gets into, and this is the exact configuration steps you need to do, like with actually, the actual configs and even maybe copy paste where you might put it in a command line or where you may do it in a GUI, et cetera, kind of thing. But then the larger section toward the end gets into how do you actually build it out and actually do the load testing around here's all the work that was done to show and validate boot storms at that scale and recomposing, all the stuff that goes to say, this will actually truly work. It's not just like, hey, here's a formula and a bunch of parts and pieces that'll match the formula, but the actual application validation testing was done. So one thing that we talk about, and I'm almost, hey, shame on me for not mentioning it sooner, is that the goal here is to make this application centric. CVDs are a huge part of that with serious work that go into that. And the reason it says new is there's new ones coming out all the time. You can see a little bit of a listing here around CVDs. The next piece here goes into speed of deployment. Right? So there's been conscious investment by Pure and Cisco into building a tool we call Smart Config, and we make this available to our partners to be able to help with more rapid deployment, reliable deployment. And this is where sometimes I used to do this as a customer, I used to do as a partner, actually, where we did a lot of implementation, kind of thing, right? So this is an investment by Pure and Cisco into our partner ecosystem to give you as a customer a better experience around the speed of deployment and potentially taking that down from, sometimes I used to do this, it might be weeks to install this to even days or even hours, depending on some variables and nuances there. The last couple of pieces here from day one get into thinking about, the artificial constraints and kind of sometimes the design center of scalability. We refer to this with HCI, right? And obviously Cisco and Pure, we partner around hyperflex and capabilities there. But so this is meant to be just a very factual conversation, right? If you ask me about the maximum number of UCS blades in FlashStack, it's the number of UCS blades. It's 160 in a UCS domain kind of thing. Same thing with Pure, right? You need to scale them you can independently. And that's a design center of the product because of that disaggregated flexibility. And thanks to the core performance characteristics of Pure Storage and the server and the stateless approach from a UCS standpoint, we often see that people can, not that you don't need silos sometimes, but you can often have fewer silos than otherwise, and they can even be optimized in different ways around CPU, RAM, capacity, etc. Okay, we're through day one, and I'm about to jump back over to Scott because I almost feel like I've been going too long. We'll keep trucking through day two, and then I'll Scott come back in. Day two. So this is about daily operations. What's that going to be like? Even stuff like, when I call in for support, do I have to set aside half a day? And, is it not a fun experience? So there are multiple support offerings, and some of these go into it being more than a reference architecture. And actually, I should have said that back here with Smart Config, okay? This is one of the things that make it more than a reference architecture. This is actually code that we have built as Pure in Cisco to be able to help accelerate things. It's more than just, papers and validation, and even solution engineering, as wonderful as CVDs are. Another piece there from a day two standpoint is around the support experience. You can, and many customers do, have direct support with Cisco and with Pure, right? And we have back-end support agreements, and there's very high customer support satisfaction metrics there. Of course, this is TAC on the Cisco side and Pure support. There is as well what is called Cisco solution support. So this is where Cisco support will actually support the whole stack from a first call perspective. And this isn't actually just even Pure, it's even VMware as well within that solution support standpoint. One of the interesting things that I didn't mention before about CVDs is that the final output of CVDs, the Cisco Validated Designs, is that they are actually sent over to Cisco support. And Cisco support will not, if you're not running according to a CVD, it's not that Cisco and Pure support will say go away, call me back later, a little bit of shade sometimes of CI support experiences, but they will support the specific CVD design as done and tested. You're not boxed into it, but there's an enhanced support experience there, even around CVDs. Many of our partners choose to invest in first call support as a FlashStack authorized partner, and you can go all the way to the point of Cisco can actually manage the whole thing via Cisco Managed Services. Now, of course, there's some of really complementary nature around the strength of Pure One and what we've done here for, when I say it's actually 7 or 8 years now. Okay, so this is a software as a service product that drives into predictive support, full stack analytics, AI-driven management pieces. And there's some robustness here where we're embracing what Pure One is around things like simulating new workloads, and if I'm going to move things around from a storage. There's a depth of focus here that's complementary and makes a lot of sense, but there's also some real corresponding efforts here by Cisco, and this is even a more recent but huge strategic focus from Cisco around Intersight. If you're a Cisco customer, FlashStack customer, you haven't heard about Intersight, I'm a little bit surprised because it's been a big focus, but this goes to the idea of having a single interface to do all the actual active management of FlashStack. Like it says, reduces need for skilled engineers. And the one, not reduces, it's like that these can be complex pieces, so we can simplify some of this need. I'm always very cautious about it because I came from a customer standpoint. If you're listening, like, ooh, do I need to be worried here? No, there's actually good stuff here for you, because in this case, Pure Storage is the first and only third-party vendor supported with Intersight. And let's illustrate that out a little bit. So, and this is where, when we look at Intersight and how Pure integrates in, and even other things too, you have the idea of tasks. Okay, these are the individual units and items, around volumes and hosts and pods, etc. Pods is actually what we do for synchronous replication. That's an active cluster for us. But the real power here, and even if you're like really deep at this stuff, comes in workflows. The way I like to illustrate it is really with number 5. You may not do this every day, but it helps illustrate the concept well. About, what if you've got to put in a new ESXi host? Think about the number of interfaces you've got to be in, whether you like these interfaces or not, right? Kind of thing. There's a lot of work and continuing improvement there, but you're probably in vCenter for the some of the initial deployment. You're in UCS Manager for a service profile. You're in some Fabric stuff for boot from SAN. You're doing stuff in the FlashArray UI. So what if you could have all of that in a single UI, a single workflow to deploy that? Even if you're really good at this stuff, that makes it a lot less likely you're going to fat finger something somewhere. You're going to bounce between the interfaces, get something a little bit out of order, because the last time you did it was a couple weeks or a month ago. There's a lot of value there. Correspondingly, there's so much in the Cisco portfolio here, it's not even funny, right? Kind of thing. The one I think we're going to highlight here is actually CWOM, or Cisco Workload Optimization Manager. Like it says, this can help analyze workload consumption, automatically allocate resources in real time. But this is actually where I think I want to kind of turn it back over to Scott for a minute, both to give some commentary on Intersight, because that is such a huge strategic Cisco initiative, a little bit of commentary about CWOM, and I think there is even a newer piece you wanted to talk about there too.
I do, Andrew. I do. Thank you so much. So we're excited about Intersight because it's what our customers need have been asking for. If you really look at how customers in the past have managed and maintained their environments, it's all around having multiple tools. There's a lot of customers we have that have 5 to 10 different tools within their data center, and it even expands outside their data center to be able to manage and optimize their infrastructure. So what we've done is we've taken that to heart, and we've developed a tool called Intersight. And this has been around for a while. I've been developing this for a while. But really, what's cool about it is the integrations we have with it. Even if you came to Cisco, we had multiple different solutions that, one would manage the infrastructure, one would manage the compute, another one would manage our compute and infrastructure environments. And ultimately, the goal was, let's get down to a single pane of glass. Let's make it simple. And I'm really excited about the integrations that we have with Pure Storage now with this too, with Intersight. But you did a great job of explaining what Intersight is, and an Intersight is going to continue to expand to be that one management pane of glass type of a model. And as you mentioned, we have integrations with CWOM. So really, what is CWOM? CWOM is an AI-powered application resource management tool that optimizes performance, compliance, and cost in real time, right? And we are for Cisco Live that's coming up here shortly, we're going to be talking about the phrase IWOL, Intersight Workload Optimizer is what it's called, and really what it is, it's Intersight combined with CWOM, but we're even actually taking it a step further. If you know what App Dynamics is, and just to give you a little quick commercial on it, App Dynamics is an application intelligence software that enables an enterprise to monitor, analyze, and optimize their applications. Because customers care about the application, right? Is the application working? Is the application working? Is it optimized? They don't really care about the underlying infrastructure in most cases. They just want to make sure the application is running. But you need to make sure every stage of the process is working appropriately. And one of the key benefits that you're going to get by having Intersight with the integrations with Pure Storage is the fact that you can get what we're calling IWOL, Intersight Workload Optimizer, which includes Intersight with CWOM, with AppD, which gives you the visibility to the application, down to the code, where are there issues happening, and also into the infrastructure. Oh, by the way, it can actually provision real time if issues happen, automatically or manually if you choose to do so. But again, it's worthwhile looking at what the Intersight integrations that we have with Pure Storage and really the application performance monitoring tools that you get with this now. So it's not just about infrastructure, it's not just about storage, it's about the application, bringing it all down to simplicity. So we're really excited about the efforts that we have with Pure Storage and integration of these solutions with them. So thank you, Andrew.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. One of the interesting challenges here is that there's such a depth of portfolio from a Cisco standpoint, from a Pure standpoint, that whenever we do these kind of events, it's like, man, where do we focus? There's so much stuff to put in here. How many more slides should we put in and pick the items to go in? So if you're curious about any of these, you're thinking Pure portfolio, Cisco portfolio, please reach out, because there's so much more that we could explore here. One thing before we go over to use cases and just being even more application centric is I like to take a little bit of a kind of a sidestep here and think about kind of consumption models and cloud, because those are actually very, very much linked together, right? Cloud often moves from a CapEx to an OpEx consumption model. And if you're sitting here thinking like, this all sounds kind of interesting, and maybe you've had some stuff you like there, some good stories or whatever else, but you're in an organization that's starting to move more toward an OpEx perspective, or is more moving toward a cloud first, or trying to figure out how to navigate the cloud, and you don't want to box yourself in. I want to take that head on here. So first, from a Pure standpoint, about 7-8 months ago, we introduced what we call Pure as a Service. Everything within the Pure portfolio can be purchased on an OpEx basis. It's kind of what you would expect, shorter term commitments, pay-per-used gig. There's even relevance here from a hybrid cloud standpoint. It goes across the entire Pure portfolio. There's a good bit here from a Cisco standpoint. I'm not going to hit on as deeply, but this goal of starting to operationalize costs in ways that make sense. But that links in. It's not just a consumption model conversation. Sometimes it's an organization that on-prem wants to go just to OpEx, right? But often it's around this idea of hybrid cloud. And so as well, there's stuff here from, we think about the difference in on-prem and the cloud. Not good or bad, just very, very different at a storage and a compute and otherwise low layer kind of thing. At a Pure level, we've done specific investments here around what we call Cloud Block Store. So you can actually embrace running, having the capabilities on-prem as you have in the cloud as you have on-prem. This is actually some really hard engineering work. There's been a lot of work with Cisco too to kind of embrace customers who truly want to run an AWS and think about kind of application rationalization and where those workloads should live. So, and this may be a spot where if you are playing buzzword bingo while you're watching this, you're like, ding, I got my hybrid cloud one, kind of thing. And I recognize, depending on when I'm talking with folks, sometimes I say hybrid cloud and I can see people like, you just went there, come on. But for other folks, this is a real organizational initiative and with some real meaning behind it that, they're trying to think about how can they embrace on-prem and the cloud in the best way while they're keeping things secure, maintaining flexibility. So I would actually argue to you, kind of positive here, a little bit of debate style, that if you're trying to do this, FlashStack is the strongest foundation, very strong, if not the strongest foundation for hybrid cloud on-prem, because there's capabilities there from, an OpEx standpoint, financial consumption models. There's really strong abilities here, just like it outlines around performance and availability and, the costing and consolidation. There's also the aspect where to be able to embrace the cloud, we need to free up some time at a day two level. We need to simplify things enough so we have time to learn some of the new concepts. That's not saying like cloud and other stuff is hard and scary. Okay, it's just like we need time to absorb the new approaches, right? So by simplifying on-prem, it can free up that time, that mental space, and hopefully in a way that aligns to organizational structures, whether it's operated by a unified team, or maybe it's actually you've actually got it maybe as a service construct, or even it's maybe an enterprise where you've got different teams for these components and they work together, but there need to be discrete points of control. This can actually fit really well into that. I know there's been a lot of thought inside Cisco about this, Scott, because we're not naive about the environments and customer objectives. Do you mind kind of continuing those thoughts a little bit from a Cisco standpoint?
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. People have typically thought about Cisco as a private cloud company, and that's the furthest from the truth. Over the last several years, we focused beyond that. And we're really focused on what our customer needs. Where are the applications going to be stored? And that doesn't equal private cloud only. That includes public cloud and even co-locations. So we've come to market with a lot of solutions. A lot of these solutions we've jointly worked with Pure on, right? We talked about Intersight. We talked about the solution of IO, Intersight Workload Optimizer, which really can be considered a hybrid cloud tool, even could be a private cloud or a private or just purely a public cloud tool. And also, if you think about ACI, I know you're going to be talking about ACI here coming up in the near future too in this session, but ACI, right? Our customers are going to have applications spread between the public, private, and co-locations. And if you look at ACI, what are your capabilities with it? ACI has the ability to be that policy orchestrator, right? Be able to automate your infrastructure, the ability to have that policy defined once in your private data center or in your public data center and move between the different workloads that you have. So really, again, it's all about Cisco and Pure. We understand that it's everything is in private cloud. It's the applications are more diversified than they ever were now, and our solutions are too. Back to you, Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we'll bring it home now with use cases. So we're going to dive into a couple applications. We've been alluding to them all along the way, right? Hopefully we've had this theme of kind of threaded through it all of being application centric, but let's go there even more, right? This is going to be a little bit of a lightning round because like, whoo, that's you're going to hit on applications in like 5 minutes or so. Yeah, we're actually going to do it that way because we can dive deeper on each one of these. You can find CVDs for them or other pieces where you can go way longer than we can go in any webinar format. So first, VDI. I think it is finally the year of VDI, if I dare say that, after many, many years of that, and from even going back to this stuff like almost 10 years ago. When we look at VDI, there's some interesting things from a requirement standpoint. This actually comes out of one of our internal architectural documents, requirements around data security. We've got to have predictable performance, or else the end user experience suffers. It's got to be simple, not just to set up, but especially as you scale, given the scaling can be unpredictable. Scaling needs can be unpredictable, especially these days. And integration and protection is really resiliency. So what I'd like to call out here is this is actually some testing, actually around FlashStack environment, of looking at various the VDI user experience, from looking at whether it's boot storms and can you handle thousands of desktops booting in minutes without huge IOPS requirements, to login storms, which are related but a little bit different, right? We've seen cases where dramatic improvement in login times. User experience is key, but then there's even stuff like virus scanning and patching and recomposing and updating. There's a story that I love here, and this goes back to about 5 years ago. It's before I joined Pure. There's actually someone who came up to he's now actually a VP at Pure, and came up and talked about how actually FlashStack and the impact actually saved his marriage, which sounds like a little bit over the top almost. You're like, really? He was spending 3/4 of his weekends in the office doing patches and recomposes and updates on their VDI environment, and because that was the only time he could do it with his previous solution. There was such a dramatic impact with FlashStack that after that, he basically got his weekends back. He got his weekends back with his family. So it might feel a little bit over the top, but it's like sometimes we get lost in the technology and the applications there can be real human impact here. And it's really cool when we see that, right? Next, SAP. I think everyone's heard of SAP. It's kind of an important application from it's a business ledger. It runs the business standpoint. The things that I like to highlight here is there's a lot of change here coming. I think we all know this, especially your environment. You know, a lot of SAP customers looking to change or morph their environments. Pure has actually just recently been added to the platinum level in the SAP Partner Edge program. So you're like, so what is that? That's actually an invite only from SAP. Previously, there were only 2 companies in the storage category. Just being real. We are the third one and the first one that's been invited for quite a while. That's due to we have a large number of SAP customers on FlashStack. FlashStack, I was talking with some of the folks inside Pure and SAP, and Cisco is really the closest that you can get to an SAP appliance. Dramatic reduction in deployment times, and the ROI is great, along with lower management costs and flexibility. Let's move into the database world. So Oracle, that's very important from a tier 1 database standpoint. There's a phenomenal increase from a storage I/O wait time reduction that helps with performance increase of Oracle without having to do tuning. This even then means, you know, faster application development. We haven't even talked about the power of snapshots on FlashArray and the immutability aspect and how they're instant. There's awesome impact around application development and time, and then even the data reduction. And sometimes this can even go into a reduction from an Oracle license standpoint, right, which can turn into a very direct financial standpoint. Apply some of those same concepts over to SQL Server. The one thing that I'll call out here is that there's even some great integration. It's not just around 6 nines of availability and the responsiveness. We've even actually released some integration directly into SQL Server Management Studio. So having never been a DBA, but played around, I know at least select star.star is a bad thing, right, kind of thing, and I have friends that are DBAs. But often a lot of the tools here, frankly, from vendors, require the DBAs to not be in the interface they prefer, which for SQL is SQL Server Management Studio. So we've released this actually as a plugin that helps leverage directly into SSMS, the tool that folks prefer. To, you can back up a database, a terabyte database in seconds. It's actually really calling a snapshot and doing the VSSQS, and it's reflected in the catalog within SQL Server Management Studio. Healthcare is, of course, a huge focus here, just overall, as well as given current events, right, kind of thing. Take some of the simplicity and apply that to a healthcare organization. Of course, resiliency, uptime, availability are critical. But one of the interesting things here is that sometimes if you have enough impact on the infrastructure stack, you can actually, again, do things that impact all the way up the business. We've seen impact on reimbursement maximization and even the analytics that can be done around clinical and from a finance standpoint that can actually really benefit the organization. Last but not least here kind of thing is moving into the world of AI and ML. So I think we've all heard there's lots of data out there. It keeps growing kind of thing. So, this moves from we're trying to describe the data. We're starting to leverage CPUs. So, what's going to happen, what will happen in the future versus what happened in the past. And, and then even we get into GPU land, what should we do in the future kind of thing. So we do often see, let's just be real, that sometimes people rent some GPUs in the cloud. But a lot of times as they grow and scale, that can actually become very inefficient and costly. And then as this stuff is on-prem, often data scientists, because the data scientists, there's not enough of them, and they're relatively well paid, right? They should be kind of thing. The last thing that we want them to do is have to wait for data to move between silos or actually spend time on kind of having to just maintain the infrastructure. They should be doing data science things, not infrastructure things. So this is where FlashStack, just similar to SAP, kind of the closest you can get to a data science appliance, if you will, partnered with Cisco. Of course, on the Cisco side, this is around the C480 M5ML with a huge amount of GPU cores thanks to the NVIDIA cards. FlashBlade providing the bandwidth, because once you start to go to the point of saying, I'm going to have a lot of GPU cores, keeping them fed from a storage and throughput standpoint becomes very, very difficult. Different sizes here and different flavors, as you can see. Now, we are just about out of time. I am hoping that as we've gone through this, now that we put this slide back up, it's like, this isn't quite as scary. We actually hit on just about everything here. If there's something here that you have a question about, we've been watching chat along the way and trying to answer those as best we can. But, kind of in closing, that what we have here is the ability to refresh without architecting, with a great impact on management overhead. Statelessness can drive uptime and flexibility, innovation without re-architecture, flexibility around CapEx and OpEx, and of course, speed of deployment. with that, I think we will move into Q&A. We've got just a couple minutes left for it. I think we did all right on timing, Scott. I think I see a couple questions here, and we'll bounce back and forth how we do them. So I think the first one, awesome. I think the first one is around, well, it's actually around Intersight, but the question is, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit here. Did I hear that FlashStack can be managed in one interface? The answer is yes. This is continuing development around Intersight. So we talked about that in a couple slides, and we went back and forth. So Intersight gives the ability for single pane of glass, right? There's still continuing work and development being done there, but this is an existing product with great integrations where Pure is the first non-Cisco product to integrate in, which is why we can say it's FlashStack, versus just Cisco components. Anything you want to add there, Scott?
Yeah, and we hit on it a few times in the presentation, but right, it's a one-stop interface, and as we explained, it goes further than that too, right? It goes to the ability to do infrastructure and application monitoring and optimization too. So definitely worth taking a look. And as you mentioned, very tight integrations with Pure FlashStack.
Cool. Question number 2, I think. We can still do it. We've got about 3 minutes left, 3 or 4 minutes. So number 2, there was a question about, can Cisco support the entire FlashStack? And we hit on that a little bit in the Cisco slide, but really about that kind of first call support all going to Cisco. I think I should let you elaborate there, Scott.
Yeah, it's I kind of think about it as the one call, that's all, right? It's Cisco solution support, and not only for Cisco Pure, but you're going to have VMware potentially on there too. So you can get the one call. We'll be able to help and bring in the proper resources to make sure we troubleshoot your problems in a timely fashion. I want you to think about this a little bit. If you think about a Pure and Cisco FlashStack, the life cycle, and I think this goes back to the life cycle of why a FlashStack is important. We got CVDs for simplicity of infrastructure and application turnup, right? We got that. We've got operation and management with Intersight, and then you got the day 2 support and operations through Cisco Solution Support. So it's to put it in one sentence, Cisco and Pure Storage work together to quickly resolve issues as they arise, saving customers time and money. I think that's what customers are looking for: simplicity, agility, and speed. Right? Those are the main things.
I love it. I mean, this kind of keys off where we talked about, kind of it's more than a reference architecture. We're embracing the flexibility of reference architecture, but even in some cases going toward the goals and achieving those, that we've had some other architecture options in the past for, but trying to represent what customers care about. Ironically, that actually leads into the last question a little bit, and this is one I actually appreciate. Sometimes when you get Q&A, you're like, man, I don't know if I want to answer that question, but we're going to take this one on. Again, we're paraphrasing a little bit. So the question is I feel like there are some similar options in this space. You can obviously, Pure has other partnerships, Cisco has other partnerships. What is different about FlashStack compared to these other partnerships? And I think I'll kind of take that on first. Is there are some common things here. Let's be real. You look at the Cisco validated designs. There are more of them than that are just for Pure. I'd actually argue though that CVDs, if you're a Cisco customer, not a Pure customer yet, the Cisco and Pure CVDs actually still benefit you. If you're a Pure customer, not a Cisco customer yet, you can still get good stuff out of them, right? So there's a lot of solution engineering work there that's specific to the partnership, but there's also just some specific code development work. We mentioned Smart Config. That's actually code that's been developed. There's solution support. There's Intersight. That's the first and currently only integration. Pure is the first and only integration there outside of Cisco. So I never want to make this a contentious question, right, kind of thing, but just factually, there are some unique things to this partnership. I think, Scott, anything else that you want to add there, as well as maybe any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a lot of them, right? You hit on the fact that we went with Pure Storage with the Intersight integrations. If you look at the success and growth, I mean, if you look at the growth we've had, and the growth is, again, a result of how customers see our partnership and relationship. It comes down to, a seamless one company feel. And I think that's really important. I know that we have that between Pure and Cisco. And, I would, the success has really proven it. And I think, Andrew, that probably says it all.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. I'm not sure I could say it better. So with that, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you have further questions, hopefully you do, please don't hesitate to reach out to your local Cisco and Pure sales teams. And with that, I think we will call it a wrap. David, I really appreciate the hosting here, and I will turn it back over to you.
All right, excellent presentation, Scott and Andrew. Thank you so much. I really love the whiteboarding. I love the back and forth discussion there. That was a great presentation. So again, thank you to Cisco and thank you to Pure for supporting today's event. And thank you to our audience for sticking with us throughout the event. Let's see, first question. Let's see, sorry. We did all the questions. Hey, it's time for the gift card. The gift card winner for today's prize. That is for an Amazon $300 gift card. That is going to Joseph Longway from Tennessee. Congratulations, Joseph Longway from Tennessee. We'll reach out to you to deliver your prize. Again, thank you to our audience for supporting the event today. For more information, visit purestorage.com. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.